So welcome back to the Garage Woodcarver. I'm here with Spencer and Sophie again, my
lowly apprentices.
Lowly apprentices, yes, indeed. And we're going to talk about some wood finishing. And the first thing I wanted to show you guys was this book, Classic Wood Finishing by George Frank. And unfortunately, it's not available on Amazon anymore, but you should be able to find it used. And this is an excellent book on French polishing, plus a bunch of other finishes that we're doing. But we're just basically going to focus on using shellac. I love using shellac. It's the best sort of finish that you can do. It's non-toxic. It's easy to apply. It's very forgiving. And it's pretty durable too. So anyhow, and what we have to start off with is this button lac, which is just basically when it was processed, it was kind of dripped out into these little coin-sized, probably like $half $sized pieces of shellac. And this is just a large piece of shellac. And what we're going to do is actually dissolve that. Once I drop it, dissolve that in some alcohol. But these are pretty large to actually dissolve, and we're going to actually break them up before we do that. So anyhow, I just kind of wanted to show you that. This stuff was described as Bisaki button lac when I bought it. And I probably had this bag for, this was like about a pound. Probably had this bag for, I don't know, 10, 15 years now that I've just been working my way through it.
That bag is older than me.
Yes, indeed. So I got this from Homestead Finishing Products, and I was just on their website looking at what they sell now, and they don't actually sell this this type of shellac anymore, but there is a website called shellac.net that sells this type of shellac. And most of the shellac that you buy is called de-waxed shellac, and that means they've actually just used a chemical process to take out some of the wax, the natural wax of the shellac. But for French polishing, which is kind of what I like to do, even if we're not actually going the whole way through the French polishing steps, I like to use this button lac because it actually has a bit of wax in it, and it actually works a little longer. So anyhow, what we are going to do though, I have some of this stuff that's already been broken up. You can see that. I've got it in this mason jar here.
That was mostly me dropping them on the floor.
Exactly, yeah. So,
they're highly breakable, people.
They're highly breakable, yeah. But it doesn't matter because we're going to break it up even more with this other mason jar. Usually I store these in mason jars, and I am going to put some glasses. I don't think they're really necessary, but... And I'm just taking it, this is an old blender that we have, and I just kind of use this for grinding shellac. I'm going to just grind it up. Definitely have to put my hand over the lid and do that some more. Alright. That wasn't totally successful. Still some pretty big chunks in there, but I broke it up a little bit. Do a little more. And just breaking it up a little more. So a lot of times when you get shellac, you'll actually get shellac flakes, and since those have a lot more surface area, it's easier for them to dissolve, because what we're going to be doing is dissolving this in denatured alcohol. So, and basically if I want to do my starter jar, I kind of use this jar and then I'll pour from this into other smaller jars to cut it down with shellac. But for right now, just to dissolve it, I'm just gonna basically fill it a little bit above the level of the actual shellac with the alcohol. Move this out of the way. So if you don't have a blender that your wife was going to throw away that you're going to use, you can just crush this, put it between some like heavy paper, and crush it with a hammer or something like that to kind of get it a little finer than these big flakes. But I'm going to add the shellac.
Hey,
or the alcohol.
You were saying that this was like beetles.
Beetle poop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's made. Yeah, it's made by insects. So you can see that's pretty much just covered up a little bit over the level of the actual flakes, and we're just going to work from that. So when they talk about shellac, they talk about, if you read the books, they talk about a pound cut, like a 1 pound cut or a 2 pound cut. And basically, that's when you're talking about a 2 pound cut, that's 2 pounds of shellac that's dissolved in 1 gallon of alcohol. So I'm not really even sure what kind of cut this is. I just know this is, once this all dissolves, and you can see it's already starting to dissolve, it's turning the color of the alcohol into that more amber color. And this shellac is actually pretty dark. It'll give the wood a darker color, which I don't mind. I like the look of it. So anyhow, that's pretty much it for right now. We have this jar of shellac that has still got large chunks of the actual shellac buttons in it, and what we're going to do is let that sit and like shake it every once in a while. So I'll just come in and shake it, and that should dissolve in about a day or so. The finer you grind it, obviously, the quicker it actually dissolves. But
is this a finished product?
This is actually a very cut down shellac, so it's not a lot of shellac to the alcohol.
It's very pale.
Yeah, it's very pale. But these are the kind of bottles that I use to actually fill the shellac. So I'll go over making a shellac pad too. I'll put these back. I'll use these ones right now. But basically, what you have is some sort of filler, and so you can use old yarn or something like that, wool or whatever, but something that's got a little bit of a bounce to it. And this is just raw cotton, and I had like about a bag of it, and it'll last you forever. I forget how much it was, but again, I've had that for a long time. So, anyways, you just take about a handful of it, and I've got this piece of cloth here. This is just like a canvas cloth, and it's just white, so it's not going to impart any color into it once the alcohol gets into it. And I'm going to make what's called a pad or a fad, depending on if you're British or French, I think. So anyhow, we'll call it a shellac pad, but we just put that in the center of it, and we're just going to wrap the cloth around it pretty tightly. And that's actually kind of small, so I'm going to add a little more cotton to it. And what it does is it acts as a kind of like a sponge, because when you're French polishing, you're actually this acts as a reservoir for your shellac, and you apply a lot of pressure. So you're going to make this polish, and you squeeze it, and you're going to hold it, and ideally you want to hold it so that you want to form it so that it kind of comes to like a teardrop shape, so you can kind of get into all the little nooks and crannies. So anyhow, and then you're going to hold it like that. So you're kind of putting, when you actually polish it, you're going to put a lot of pressure on it. Stick through. And this is a project Spencer's working on. It's going to be a display for his swords. But anyhow, so that's your polisher. And when you fill it from the back. So I'll fill it a little bit here with this old polish. What that does is it actually helps filter out the shellac, because when it comes in that button form, it's got like all sorts of impurities in it, and little bits of twig and probably beetle.
I can make pretty formulas.
Oh, cool, we're filming. All right, so we're filling this up from the back, And you can see in the rear there, you can see that there's a bunch of little flecks in there, which we don't want in our finish, but fortunately the cover is actually gonna filter that out. And I'm gonna give that a squeeze. You can see if I squeeze it, it wicks it to the pad itself. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a very light coat on here using the pad, so holding the pad at the edge. And then you start in the middle and drag it to either end. And this is pretty wet right now because I just filled it, and it's also very, I would say it's probably close to a 1 pound cut, so it's very thin, but it also dries very quickly. And you just keep reapplying it.
What about the edges?
Well, we've already done the edges with the initial coat, but we can go back over them. But anyhow, this is just a demonstration of using the pad. So when you initially put it on, it's going to be pretty, you saw how I did that, and I'm not using a lot of pressure because it's pretty full. But it allows me to keep going back over it. The thing about shellac is it dries very quickly, and you can apply multiple thin coats. And what those coats do is they all meld together. And also, so when you're actually building up the polish, the coats will melt together, and you're actually gonna, eventually you'll start doing a circular motion all around the board.
Interesting.
And you're gonna be applying more and more pressure as the shellac kind of gets squeezed out onto the board. And there's less and less actually in the pad itself.
What's the circular motion help to do with something like?
So the circular motion, kind of, think about polishing a shoe. What we're doing is we're actually forcing the shellac into all the pores of the wood.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can always come back and drag it back over. Basically, that's kind of the premise. There are a couple more steps involved. When it starts getting, you can see I'm actually got a little bit of buildup of shellac on the pad there. See that?
Yeah.
When it starts, the pad will eventually start to drag on the surface, and then we can just use a drop of mineral oil. We just take a drop of mineral oil and put it on the pad itself, and that'll help it to kind of keep gliding over the surface while you're working it. But right now we're not actually gonna bring this up to a true French polish, like mirror finish. But this is useful, this pad is useful to actually just apply shellac at any point. Get the edges.
But first,
You gotta come over here if you're gonna ask a question.
well, I'm just thinking about, the big block of wood we cut it from, it's totally a different shade from.
Yeah, it's almost like this is wet, which it is wet, right? So it looks like the color looks different. But anyhow, that's kind of the basic of making a pad. You guys have any questions about that? No? So it's basically just like a spongy inner cloth with wrapped with a more durable cloth on the outside.
Pretty sensible.
Yep. And we are gonna, one thing about these is once you've made them, you can reuse them kind of indefinitely until you wear out the pad itself. You can keep moving it around as it wears a hole in it. But you want to store it in a jar. Just store it wet. Yeah, this is a pickle jar. But you're just going to put it in a jar to store it, and that way all the alcohol won't evaporate out of it, and we just won't end up with a lump. But that's pretty much it for French polishing right now. We're just simple way to apply shellac, and come back to this. All right. Thank you.